I made a custom 3D printed Macropad from an old keyboard, some free 3D files online, and some slightly modified code. I also tested my cat for voltage. Anyways, let's jump into the process. For starters, I picked up a used keyboard from a secondhand store. This was about 2,000 to 2,500 yen. Obviously you can see it's not in the best state, but for our purposes we don't really care about how clean or dirty it is. As long as some of the switches work, it's all good. I began by taking apart the keyboard and then proceeding to desolder the switches. First mistake here was to buy a keyboard with LEDs installed. These RGB LEDs add 4 extra pins that you have to desolder, and it is a huge pain in the ass. Anyways, you can see some of my struggle here. I applied different techniques with the desoldering pump, desoldering wick, and just brute force. Eventually I managed to get a few keys out. Most of them were unusable or partially destroyed. However, I came back another day, improved my technique, and was able to perfectly remove the switches that I needed. I also removed one extra for a little keychain fidget toy. Now that that process was done, I cleaned up my mat and moved on to the assembly. I haven't done a ton of soldering in the past, but it actually went much better than I expected. Basically, after putting all the keys into the housing, I flipped it over and used this diagram to wire up the switches. In this specific build, there's no diodes involved. All of the ground pins get connected together to go to one ground pin on the board, and all the rest of the pins get their own header on the board. Trying to get the wires the correct length for the ground pins was a little bit of a hassle, but not too bad. I knew I had some extra room in this case, so for the other wires, I decided to leave them a little bit longer just for ease of access. As I went along as well, I checked for continuity between the wires to make sure that everything was soldered correctly and that the connections were making a full connection. Surprisingly, all of my solder joints were firm and didn't require any resoldering. I was very happy with this result, and after connecting the Pro Micro to all the switches, then it was time to pop it in the housing. This specific 3D printed file was specifically made for the Pro Micro and 12 MX style switches, so once everything was in the housing, it fit quite well and it was time to test. Once connected to the computer, I fired up the Arduino IDE, copied the code from the 3D files notes, and flashed it to the board. Earlier I said I modified the code slightly, and that is actually true. I'm no programmer, but some of the values or the numbers in the code were not correct. Specifically, some of the pin numbers were repeated, and I thought that this would affect it, so I changed them to continue in the same sequence. This actually proved successful and made it so the board worked flawlessly. Just to double check my work, I fired up OBS, opened one of the places for the hotkeys, and started pressing every single switch. We got all the correct results for the additional F keys that we assigned to each of the Macropad switches, and it works just as intended. This is what the finished switches plus case looks like. It is bulging a little bit, so I have to kind of reroute the wires a bit to make it fit properly. The snaps on the case don't exactly account for this, so that's partially my error. But once all the cables are routed properly, then I'll just hot glue it, add any more glue to the specific switches in case they are popping out, and pop the keycaps on. I still haven't specifically decided what each key will be bound to, but for the most part I want to use it for OBS during streaming, maybe a little soundboard fun when I'm playing games slash streaming slash making videos, and when I'm editing videos like this one to make some shortcuts to make editing a lot more quick. This is my first hardware hobby video on this channel, but if you liked it, please subscribe for more. I will be doing a lot more projects in the future. I have many more lined up and many more planned out, so please consider subscribing and sticking around. The next video that should be going up is the fume extractor, which you see in some of these shots. I did use it for this project and it worked amazingly. I've made a few modifications to make it a bit better, but as you can see in this video, it worked perfectly fine and does exactly what it needs to. If you noticed any room for improvement or any things that I did wrong or could be changed, please let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to try to fix that for future videos. Thanks again if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Señor Gomi is very hungry. Please subscribe to feed him.